It's time for another episode of Spies, Lies, and Private Eyes. Here's your host, Terrence McCauley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Spies, Lies, and Private Eyes right here on the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. My guest today is Jack Carr. He is a #1 New York Times bestselling author and former Navy SEAL. Only the Dead, his latest book in his successful Terminal List series, is available from Atria wherever books are sold in any format. Jack, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on. Great to see you.
Great seeing you too, my friend. How would you describe your latest entry, Only the Dead?
Well, there were a few things in the last novels that I left hanging out there. And, the art of this, I think, especially when you have a series character that goes on for multiple books, is to give enough resolution by the end of the individual novel that the reader feels like they, for lack of a better term, got their money's worth. You just didn't write one part of a continuing story and then leave it, but enough that there's resolution, but also just like with the end of a chapter, you want to make that person turn that page and start the next chapter. Same thing with the end of a book, with that last chapter, with that epilogue, you want to leave it so that they want to get the next book. So how do you do that without just stopping? Essentially, like, oh, I hit my word count, done. So I don't do that, and I don't pay much attention to my deadlines. Maybe edit that out for Simon and Schuster. Just it's okay, because it takes however long it takes. And this story, I thought when I looked at because typically I start with a title, because I don't want any bandwidth wasted on thinking about the title, as that bandwidth should be going into the story. I have about a word or two or a sentence theme that's going to guide the writing process. I have a one-page executive summary that I write where I read it and I ask myself, hey, is this worth the next year and a half of my life? And if the answer is yes, then I read it again and I say, well, if someone else were to pick this book up like this and walking by Hudson News or something in the airport and were to read a little bit about what the book was about here, either on the back in a paperback or right here in the front cover flap jacket on a hardcover, would they be willing to invest time that they're never going to get back in this story? And if that answer is also a yes or a probably, then I'm all in. Then I turn that into the outline, and then I turn that outline into the narrative. But when I wrote this outline, it was like, okay, it'll be about 115,000 words. This is the 6th one. I'm kind of figuring this out, getting the feel for it at this point. And then I blew right past 115,000 words. 120, past 125, 130, 135. So this one's about 139,000 words. So it's the longest to date, and it can also be used as a blunt impact weapon or a doorstop if anybody for another purpose. So it took so that one took a little longer than anticipated, but that's just because that's how long it took for the story to unfold, and that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. Gosh, that was a long way to answer your question, wasn't it?
No, that was fine. That was fine. How long do you really spend a lot of time when you're writing sticking to the outline, or are you the type of guy who is going to allow the story to evolve well before what you set out for yourself?
Yeah, it's going to evolve, and it's going to evolve naturally as I continue to do research into certain parts or certain characters. As those characters get to know each other through dialogue, I find that's where I get to know the characters, especially if they're new characters. I have a list that I start with just so I can see, okay, so last names, especially the Russian last names, those are difficult. They don't sound as similar to one another. They don't start with the same letters or that sort of a thing, to make it a little less confusing if you have 3 or 4 Russian characters or whatever it might be. But I try so I do that, and but as I'm doing that, I don't know exactly who they are. I know that this guy is the head of the Russian FSB, or Russian intelligence. This guy is let's say the head of the mafia or whatever it might be. But then I don't get to really know them until they start interacting and they start having that dialogue. And that's where I really get to develop the characters, I find, is through dialogue. So I don't get to know them. So I don't know how long those interactions are going to take as I'm putting in the outline. I know that there's going to be action here, but I don't know how long it's going to take to develop whatever needs to happen in that chapter, and where those characters are going to go, because they're having a conversation as I'm typing it out, and I'm getting to know them that way. So so there's room there, and then when I write the outline, I don't get stuck on a part that I haven't figured out yet. So let's say if I'm in part one and I get to the end of part one and I'm like, how's he ever going to get out of this? I don't spend weeks thinking about that. I know that I have a year to figure this out, a year and a half to figure this out, and I will figure this out. So I just keep going. I put a bunch of X's there and I just continue on, knowing that I'll figure this out as time goes on. And I look at it kind of like the battle space. In the SEAL teams downrange, you have to make very quick decisions. The enemy's adapting to you. You're always adapting to the enemy. You're looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses. They're looking for gaps in yours. You're looking to capitalize on momentum, and you're making very aggressive, creative decisions under fire. And I do the same thing, problem solving on the page. So it's really aggressive problem solving. But I have time. And if I mess up on the page, guess what? I can sleep on it. I can get up tomorrow and I can fix it. I can't do that when the bullets are flying. But in this case, when you're working on the novels, no one's going home in a body bag. You're not letting anyone down. I can go back and fix it. I can edit it. I can get it to as good as I can possibly get it, and then send it out there into the world. So it's still aggressive problem solving. It's still creative problem solving, very similar, but the stakes obviously are not nearly as high, which is great at this stage.
Yeah, exactly right. And when you were in your previous career as a special operator, did you ever think that you were going to be talking about the conversations that people have in your mind with the characters that you create, like they're actually real people?
I didn't think of it in those such tactical level terms. I just knew that one day I would write after I got out of the military, because that's what I wanted to do. Other than serve my country as a SEAL, I wanted to write thrillers, because growing up in the 80s, there was a finite amount written on special operations, a smaller amount written on SEALs. It started to get more and more as we got into the 90s, the mid 90s, and then after September 11th, and obviously after the advent of the internet, you can spend your rest of your life researching military special operations. But in the early 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, you could get to the end of the internet, because that internet was called the library. And once you got to the end of that internet, then what else do I read? And so my mom was a librarian, and I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. But by the time I was in fifth grade, that's when I was starting to make that transition from young adult literature into the same kind of books my parents were reading. So that's when Hunt for Red October came out. By sixth grade, I was reading the same kind of thrillers that I'm reading and writing today, the same kind of thrillers my parents were reading. So those were by Tom Clancy, by Nelson DeMille, by David Morrell, A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock, Mark Olden, Stephen Hunter, Louis L'Amour. I was reading all those books at a very formative time. And a lot of those protagonists, those main characters in those books back then, had backgrounds that I wanted in real life one day. So typically, the background of somebody, and even if someone listening to this didn't read those kind of books growing up, then maybe they watch TV shows or movies, and the backgrounds to those protagonists are very similar in that usually they were a Vietnam veteran. They were Army Special Forces in Vietnam. They were Navy SEALs in Vietnam, Marine sniper in Vietnam, CIA paramilitary in Vietnam. And now in 1985, they were a private investigator. They were a stuntman. They were a cop, whatever it was. But they had this background that added to the story and gave them some skills that they might need to solve problems through the course of that series television, that episode, that movie, or the movie.
So it was interesting, because you just made me think of an interesting point, because you had, back when we were kids, you had the Green Berets with John Wayne, which was not a great film, but it did a lot for the recruiting efforts. And then you had Delta Force, and then Clancy came. Delta Force came out. Chuck Norris, which was over the top. Lee Marvin, but you know what? It was the 80s.
I love that movie. It's fantastic.
It was awesome. It's George Kennedy. You can't have a disaster film without
so
George
great.
Kennedy.
All of them. It was such a great film. I have great memories of going. I know exactly where I saw it. I was with my dad. I had such a great time with that movie. I think it was 1986, if memory serves. But such a fantastic movie for a kid at that age to see, especially if you go into the military, and more so want to go into special operations. It was very inspirational. And the first part of that movie actually is very true to hijacking of TWA 847. So the first half of that movie isn't really that made up.
Right. Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, they said it was kind of like two movies. They took one script from one place and one script from another, and made one movie out of it. And the acting is actually pretty good in it. When you watch some of the supporting characters, it was a lot better than people think.
Oh
And
yeah.
then after that, that's when Clancy came along. That's when you started seeing the ascendancy of other special operators in literature, and then eventually in movies. You mentioned some of the books like Hunt for Red October. That was the gateway drug for a lot of us who write thrillers. But I was wondering, when you mentioned Nelson DeMille, Stephen Hunter, what books of theirs caught your attention that come to
Oh, okay.
mind?
The Charm School. I have such great memories. I have my original paperback of the Charm School. I read it. My grandmother read it, so we would share thrillers. So I have great memories of sharing those kind of books with her. So the Charm School is just fantastic. But I've read everything by Nelson DeMille. Nightfall is fantastic. Of course, that came out much later than Charm School.
Right.
General's Daughter. I mean, these are such classic books in the thriller genre by a master. So yeah, for sure. But those by Nelson DeMille. But the David Morrell, Brotherhood of the Rose, Fraternity of the Stone,
Oh,
Night and Fog. I mean, just classic espionage thrillers where he takes the best of UK spy fiction, which is Jean Le Carré, and then US spy fiction, which at the time was Robert Ludlum, and kind of
yep.
combined two to make something new and move the genre forward. So I've been a David Morrell fan for a long time, and now we're dear friends. And we were just talking this morning actually on email. So just what a great guy, and what a good contribution he has made to the thriller genre. People
Oh
don't
God, yeah.
know that he has influenced them, kind of like Hemingway. People disparage Hemingway sometimes.
Right.
They have no idea that, okay, well, Hemingway influenced this next person who you love, who influenced you, who you're directly influenced by, but you haven't made the connection one step back. So it's always interesting to me when and it's subjective, right? This is an art form just like anything else. So some
Sure.
people are going to love some things and not others, but it's always interesting to me when someone disparages someone like a Hemingway and has no idea that he has actually had an impact on their writing that they don't even know about. So I always find
Exactly.
that.
Exactly right. Yeah, especially with David Morrell. I mean, everyone thinks of him, oh, Rambo, but no, he is much more than that. He has expanded on his own genre journey way more than that. And every book he writes is just fantastic. And he's also a writer's writer. He's a very generous and
Oh,
good
he
guy.
is. Incredible. And if someone listening to this hasn't read The Successful Novelist, they should read that, along with Stephen King's On Writing. But you can almost, just like we were talking about with finding the end of the internet, you can almost read too many books on how to do something these days, because it's a market for it.
Right.
But you have to execute. So
Yeah.
for me, I've read Successful Novelist years ago, On Writing years ago. I read Stephen Pressfield's series of books on creativity that he wrote that starts with The War of Art. It also goes into Turning Pro, Authentic Swing, Do the Work. But that was good. Like for me, that was a solid how-to. And they're not really how-to, especially On Writing and the Stephen Pressfield books. They're so autobiographical in nature. And I love that. I love reading biographies of authors. I find those very interesting. But you can almost read how to do. So anybody who wants to be an author that's listening to this, or a writer is listening to this, eventually I would recommend stop researching those how-to and just sit down and write. That's the great thing about it. There's no rules. Screenwriting, which I've gotten to do over the last few years now for the show, there's a lot of rules in screenwriting. There's a lot of people. It's very collaborative. You have to think about budgets and set pieces and all sorts of things. No rules in writing. You have 100% creative control. And for me, there's no one has ever even mentioned at Simon & Schuster or my agent that I should go, maybe you should go here next, or maybe you should do this, or do you mind laying off on this little bit, or we think this would get you more readers. That has never, ever come up or even been hinted at. So it's wonderful to have 100% complete creative control and realize that there are really no rules. You have a blank canvas on which to do whatever you want as an artist. So that's part of what I love about it.
Yeah, it's like that boxing analogy where they say you can play football, you can play baseball, you can play soccer, but you can't play boxing. The only way you can do it is by doing it. And the same thing with writing. The other books that we've all loved and mentioned are great, but there's no substitute for actually putting your butt in the chair, your fingers on the keyboard, or a pen in your hand, at paper, and getting the work done. There's no other way to do it.
No, but I think it's important to be a student of your genre as well. I know the history of your genre and who the players were and who moved that genre forward and when and why and how that came about, what was happening in the world, and have the understanding of that history. And not just for writers, but for any industry, really understanding the history of that industry rather than just looking at it and saying, oh, this sounds cool, maybe I'll give it a shot, and jumping in without any understanding of where it is on its journey as a genre, as an industry, how it's been built, who built it, why. The history is extremely important, I think. So understanding where who these authors were that built this foundation for you now today. Yeah, there's no substitute for reading either.
Right, it is exactly. Yeah, I mean, all the best writers I know are avid readers, and to your point, if you know what the history of your genre is, you're going to be better prepared to contribute something to it. Like a lot of people love Hammett, a lot of people love Raymond Chandler, but they don't realize, I mean, the movies were cool, the stories were cool, but they were contemporary fiction for the time. It's so if you're going to write something now that's a hat and gat drama, it has to have some reason why you're doing that rather than just having characters in costume. Otherwise, it becomes empty. And that's why I think your work has found such a great audience, is because there's a certain quality there and a relatability that people understand, and you obviously know very well from your experience.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very intentional that well, I weave history in. This one in particular, I got a couple of authors in there that have one well known, one not so well known, unfortunately today, but are in the pages of this thriller, and also talk about them in the acknowledgments of the book as well. But I like to do that. I like to since I put so much time into study, and it wasn't really a study of the history, it was just a love of the history, a love of reading that did it. So it came from a place at such an early age where it wasn't like I woke up one day at age, let's say 45, and was like, oh, let's give this writing thing a try. What should I have been reading for the last 30 plus years, 35 years? Oh, okay. But now I'm reading those things through this eye that has an ulterior motive to it. There's a purpose to it. I have to read this because I need to know the history of the genre, rather than, as I grew up with it, I'm like, oh, I'm reading The Most Dangerous Game in 6th grade by Richard back in the early 20s. Oh, this is amazing. I love this. One day I'm going to write a thriller based that pays tribute to this. And that's my third novel, Savage Son. But there's no like purpose, like, oh, I need to study this. Okay, now I'm going to put this as part of my experience. What do I need to read next? It was more just out of the love of reading and the magic in those pages, which is I think a little different than just waking up one day and deciding you want to do something and study. Not that you can't do that. I think it's wonderful. It's important to do that. But I just love the way that I think this foundation that I started building so early, just out of a genuine love of reading, has really helped. As I can't imagine writing without that, actually.
Right. Now, when you did start writing, did you, for your first book, did you workshop it at all? Was it a labor of love that you did on your own? I'd be interested to know how your writing journey began. I know you grew up around a lot of books, but I mean, the craft of actually putting your own book together for the first time, how did that turn out for you?
Yeah, it's the same process that I use today that I described earlier, but instead of the one page executive summary, I had 6, 7, 8, 9 of them on a table, and Savage Son was one of them. And that's because of reading Most Dangerous Game in the 6th grade, knowing that one day I would write that tribute. But the characters weren't ready yet to explore the themes of Savage Son yet.
Right.
So I knew I couldn't start with that. And that's really the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. And I knew they weren't quite ready for that. So it was very apparent that the Terminal List was the one to start with. It was the hardest hitting out of the gate, it was most visceral, most violent. And so that's the one that I started with. I knew that was going to be the one that would introduce readers to these characters. And then I got to the end of that one and I realized, well, it's still not ready for Savage Son. It would be disingenuous to pick this character up and then just drop him into a new situation without having to deal with the traumatic events of the first novel. So I took him on a journey. journey of redemption, and initially a journey where he had to learn to live again. He had to find his next purpose in life, his next mission in life. And I thought that my editor at Simon and Schuster would just cut the first quarter of that novel, but she didn't. And it was a risk not to do that, I think, because normally I think you just, hey, this worked in the first one. Hey, let's cut this first quarter of the second novel out, and then just drop him into it right there, and then just go. And I'm really glad that no one suggested that at Simon and Schuster, because it did make things a little different out of the gate. And I was also cognizant of not wanting to be looked at as a one-trick pony. I wanted to tell the story that I wanted to tell, and not have any guidance. But back to your original question, I had about 6, 7, 8, 9 of these different ideas that all have morphed into, in one way, shape, or form, into the following novels. But when I got to the end of that, which is about a 1.5-year process, I sent it to about 20, I'm going to say 20, maybe 25 different people, different friends, and asked them to give it a read. And when I sent it out, I said, okay, if one person comes back and says that they don't like something, I just toss that aside. 2 people, toss it aside. 3 people, probably maybe just take a quick second look at it, but probably still toss it aside. 5 of the 25, take another look. Certainly 10, then yes, I'll go and look at it. So that's kind of how I went. And then these days I have 4 people that I send it to, 4 just fans of the genre. I think 3 of the 4 were former attorneys, so they have this eye for detail. So they catch a lot of things, which is wonderful. But that's how I've done it from the beginning, and that's how I've done it up through this book, and that's how I'm doing it with this 7th novel as well. So that seems to work for me. And it's not, my outlines aren't super detailed where I'm just kind of turning them into sentences. They are beginning, middle, end, so certain chapters that I know I want to have in there. So I can look at the flow. I can kind of print it out and look at the flow and see, okay, now I understand this visually. Now it's time to dive in. And I know it's going to change. Now I can dive into the narrative. So that's how it's gone from the first one. And that's how it continues to go today. It seems to work for me.
Yeah, and it certainly is, because each successive book gets better than the first one, and you would think that, and it's true, it's demonstrative, and just by reading the first one was great, but then you could see the evolution of you as an artist as you go through each of these books. They're not just run and gun books. There's actually a lot of character and plot development there, along with some really awesome action. And your writing process now, as opposed to when you started, is fascinating, because one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how have you been able to handle all kidding aside, your meteoric rise from a really great book to what you are now, and not allow that to affect your art? If anything, the books remain your core, and they're more solid than ever before. How do you handle all of that? Because there's a lot going on, a lot of distraction.
There's a lot going on. But the product, now, whatever it is, the widget, in this case, it's a book, has to be the best that it can possibly be. That's the foundation of everything else. So when I started down this path, I thought I could go live in the mountains in a cabin, write a book, send it to New York, and then maybe do one interview and then get back to work on the next novel. Very quickly, I realized that's not how it is today. Maybe there's an outlier here or there that can pull that off, but for the most part, you have to now embrace all these platforms that weren't available to authors in 1985. Then you were more dependent on your publisher to get that word out, to schedule your interviews, to buy an ad somewhere in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, or whatever it might be. And that was fantastic, but they have limited resources, and they have to allocate those resources toward the people who are probably going to make them money. So people with last names, even back then and today, last names like King, Grisham, Patterson, like that. And that's just how it is. That's business. You have limited resources. You need to allocate effectively. But today you can embrace all these different platforms and do a lot of the things that legacy media or legacy publishing marketing departments have done since the beginning of time, really, or the beginning of time, since they really established themselves as publishing houses. And you can do a lot of that yourself today, but it takes a lot of work. It takes studying the battlefield,
Yes.
looking for those same gaps, looking how to capitalize on momentum, figuring out what works for you, because now it is so personal. This interaction with people that you can have on Twitter and on Instagram and through blog postings and through podcasts, your own, other people's, that helps grow this readership, grow your audience in a way that is authentic and real and personal and adds value to people's lives throughout the year. So any sentence I write for Instagram or any sentence I write for my blog gets as much attention as any sentence I write for the book, because people are trusting me with their time and they're never going to get time back. So that's something I take extremely seriously. So I realized that about a month, maybe 2 months in the lead up to the first book's publication in March of 2018. But I'm learning. So I think it took a little longer to figure out some of those things that now are more second nature as far as the social media engagement stuff. But now I added a podcast. That takes a lot more. As you know, it's a lot more work than it might look like from the outside, because you hear people talking about it and say, oh, it's easy. You download some software, you record, you put it up there. Anybody can do it. No barriers to entry. I didn't find that to be true. I did figure out how to hit record on a little, I don't forget what it's called, Roadie Master thing, and then a camera. So I figured that part out. That's it. When it came time to upload, I can't. It's important to know your limitations, as a wise cop in a 70s movie once said. So I got about that far, and then I brought in the professionals. So I have a podcast production company that makes it look professional. But you still have to do the research for the guests, and I've read every single book of every guest that I've had. No, sorry, at least one of their books. They have like 30 books, and I didn't know them before. Their latest, maybe their last 2 or something. But I've read books for every single guest thus far who's had books out there, and that takes a lot of time. But what's great is that it also forced me to read some books that I probably wanted to read, but would have pushed to the side because there are so many things going on. And then a lot of those things made it into the book. So case in point, 1983, in this book, we have almost have a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. And there are 3 out there. So I had someone that wrote The Able Archers come on, Brian Mora, and he came on, and in reading that book, I got to incorporate that into the latest novel. And I probably would have put that to the side if he wasn't coming on the podcast. So there is some overlap there as well. That's beneficial, but it's a lot. So question was about how managing all this. I get less sleep, don't eat as well, I get zero exercise. I shouldn't say zero exercise. I walk with the dogs, I ski with the kids, that sort of a thing. But there's very little me time. And if you go on, social channels, it's you hear a lot of people talking about how important it is for take time for yourself. The writing time, I feel is that I love it. I sit down and I'm all by myself, and I get to write and research, and I love that. But like the working on yourself part, going out and working out for an hour, and then having my peat moss tea and hanging from boots for an hour, and doing like a sauna and a cold bath and all these things. I mean, yoga. Pick the kids up at school, and I've got no writing done. So I don't know. I'm not. I guess I'm the not anti. I mean, do it if it works for you. Wonderful. But for me, there's just a lot going on, so I had to prioritize. So I prioritized things, and at the bottom of the list is me right now. That's just how it goes. But I love the writing. I love learning about the screenwriting process. I've been learning about it for the last few years. Got to contribute to all the scripts. Now I'm writing the finale to the spinoff series for Amazon, and same thing for True Believer. I'll be writing one of those scripts as well. So I love it. And some things that I learned from screenwriting have made their way into the novels. Certainly has impacted the last 2. But not as far as process, but just as far as development, really. And it's fantastic. I love what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's all part of the process of inspiration. You just can't find it in the usual places. And as more opportunities come to you, you have to be willing to take it from where you find it, right?
Yeah, and then you got to ask yourself, the question: how does this add? Does this add value to what I'm building? And because now you really have to say no to things, and I'm not the best at that. I'm just happy to be here, type of a thing. But I just want to continue to build the next book. I want it to be better than this book. The next sentence I write, want to be better than the sentence before. I want the next book to move the genre forward, even if it's just by a degree. That's always what I want to do: is get better, deliver a better product, and move the genre forward, even if it's just slightly. That's always in my head as I am writing, as one of my goals. Just want to always get better. Just I also want to get, like anything else in life, I want to be a better husband, better father, better writer. And that's just, I guess that's just natural.
Yeah. It's an evolution process, and it's been fascinating to see your evolution process over the books, from journalist all the way up until this one. What is next for you? I know you just said you were working on a lot of stuff. What are you? What's the next book in the series going to be?
Yep. So working on the next book right now. Last night at midnight, it was pencils down on scripts for the spinoff series, because there's of the day we're recording this anyway, a writer strike. So I'm not part of it yet. I think I would be after this, writing this finale, but I'll write the finale episode as we're filming, because so much will change. Like the actors bring certain things, things naturally change based on what someone's brought in episode 1. That affects episode 3, which means turns it affects the finale. So those things build up through these multiple episodes. So I have a little bit of time on that anyway, and it's pencils down regardless. But we were working on the scripts that we do have, trying to get as many out as we possibly could and into the production process before that strike hit. So it's pencils down on that, which actually gives me a second, because I plan on working on all the scripts all the way through the spring and summer. So now it's once again, so that's pause. So now what do? You adapt and redouble efforts on the book, knowing that there'll be an avalanche of work that needs to be done in the lead up to filming if the strike goes right up to filming. So who knows? But that's just how life goes. But yeah, so that's in the works. There is a nonfiction book in the works as well. I've always wanted to write nonfiction, but not about me. This is the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing, so Marine barracks bombing in Beirut. There's not really the definitive work on that yet, and I work these different pieces of history into my novels, and that was a very impactful incident for me growing up, just because I was a kid. I was young, I was 10 years old, and I saw these Time magazine, Newsweek, all the newspaper that would come across our dining room table, and I'd read those because I knew I was going into the military already at that point. And I knew that the wars of the future would be, especially for special operations, would be against these different terrorist organizations. So that was very impactful, as was TWA 847, which we mentioned earlier, Achille Laurel, 103. Before all of this, the Iranian hostage crisis, 1979. Those are some of my earliest memories. So I wanted to choose one of these events and start writing nonfiction and do it as a series. So the first one is 1983 Beirut barracks bombing, doing the research right now, working with a historian on it, amazing guy, James Scott. He's a Pulitzer Prize finalist. And we're working on this thing together, and it'll come out in the fall of 2024. So about a year and a half out from that. And I thought I'd do one a year in the nonfiction space, but then I quickly realized that the amount of research it takes to do these things right is going to. So it's looking like every 2 years for the nonfiction ones, just because you have to do so much research for these things, and of course I want to do it in a very thoughtful way, a very respectful way. So I'm really excited about that. But there's all sorts of projects in the works, and I just feel so fortunate to be so busy, I guess, is the best way to put it. Very fortunate indeed.
And the best way a lot of people can follow you is by following you on social media and also on your website, right? What's your website handle? How can people find you there?
Yep, officialjackcarr.com. That is the website, and there's a blog I update probably once a month or so, sometimes more. So like during a book drop like this, there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 different blogs that'll come out this month. So that's a great way to keep up with what's going on. And then social media at Jack Carr USA. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and I think it posts to Facebook also, but I 2 was enough. So I engage on Instagram and Twitter, and I try to use it as a way to say thank you for everyone who took a risk on me as a new author and told a friend, whether it was on social media or was somebody at work or was a family member around the dinner table. And so I just sincerely appreciate all that. So I try to get back to as many people as possible just to say thank you, because it's sincerely appreciated.
And you've got your merch on your website as well.
Got the merch. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of different things on there now, from watches like this to the shirts and hats and barware, tumblers, all sorts of stuff. Whiskey glasses that are all custom, that are actual whiskey bottles that are cut off and sanded down, and things that I find fun and interesting. So there's a lot of that stuff on there.
Yeah, no, and it's all great too. And it's clear that you're having a lot of fun doing it and expanding yourself, expanding your brand, and expanding your artistry. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here, Jack. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experience with us.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to see you, and hopefully I'll see you in person one of these days again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another edition of Spies, Lies, and Private Eyes, right here on the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. And don't forget to stop by bestsellerbooks.com, where they review a lot of great books, including Jack's latest and all of his other stuff, right there for great giveaways and great reviews. Bestsellerbooks.com. See you next time, everybody.
You have been listening to Spies, Lies, and Private Eyes with host Terrence McCauley on Authors on the Air Global Radio Network.